Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, Optimizing Your Working Capital in a Changing Economic Landscape. My name is Alexi Axich and I'll be the facilitator for today's webinar. Today, we're going to be covering our expert insights to navigate uncertain times. Before we get started, I have a few tips on using the Zoom platform so you can engage with presenters and have the best experience possible. You should see the following icons on your Zoom toolbar: ask a question, chat, and raise your hand. You can use the ask a question or chat to submit a question at any time or comment. If you need any assistance, click on the raise hand and I will connect with you as soon as I can. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the entire presentation so our experts can address the questions at the end of the webinar. If you experience audio issues, you can access your audio settings and test your audio when you are already in the meeting. At the bottom left-hand corner of the Zoom meeting toolbar, you'll find either the headphone or microphone logo to join audio or mute, unmute. Click Join Audio to choose to connect your computer audio or dial into the meeting with a phone. Once your audio is connected, click Mute to disable the audio or unmute to enable your audio. Within 72 hours of the webinar, you will receive a link to download the slide deck and recorded presentation. Our 3 learning objectives for you today are for you to understand why working capital is a hot topic, learn new strategies for optimizing your working capital, and measure effectiveness of working capital strategies. I would now like to introduce you to John Stewart, partner at Armanino in our Strategy and Transformation division. He will be the moderator for today's webinar. Off to you, John.
Thank you, Alexa. Pleasure to be here with everybody today. We're really excited about this one. This is absolutely a hot topic, as Alexa mentioned. We have a fantastic lineup of experts and thought leaders here today. Along with myself, a little bit about me. I'm a partner in the firm. I work in our strategy and transformation group here. That's our management consulting arm of the firm, for those who are unaware. I work with the lovely Amy Julian as well. She's also a partner in our group. Sarah Hardage, who's a managing director in a CFO advisory practice. David Sanders, who we'll meet in a little bit, is a manager in strategy and transformation. And Nick Donato, who's in our strategic finance outsourcing group. So great lineup here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I think it's going to hopefully output with a lot of knowledge for everybody attending today. And obviously we're here for any follow-ups and questions as we go. So let's dive right in. All right, so we're going to cover a couple things today. Oh, we have a polling question. You want me? I'll handle the agenda first. Let's get to that. So we have a couple topics we're going to go through. We're going to talk about a little bit the economic outlook. We're all feeling it. We're all seeing it. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of that. What working capital fundamentals are for those who are still kind of trying to figure out how to look at this and what moving pieces they can play with. We'll go through that. Key metrics and practices, strategies for improving the cash flow, forecasting to measure effectiveness, and then probably a host of others are going to come up as well, I assume. So we're going to cover a wide berth here, guys. And please, as audience members, please hit us with Q&A as we go. We're happy to answer questions too. Polling question time, Alexa. What industry best describes your company's industry? And guys, this just helps us understand where you're all coming from so that we can make sure we're catering our answers and handling certain topics as they come up. So please give a quick choice here and we'll keep going. I think we need a countdown clock so everybody does it fast. All right, Alexa, you let us know when that polling is closed. All right. Oh, we got a good breakdown there. Okay. 25% are with professional services. Hey, so are we. That really worked out. Manufacturing distribution, 11%. Healthcare, tech, nonprofit. This is great, guys. We're going to speak to all of this. So this really helps us. Thank you for everybody for filling this out. This gives us a good understanding of who's here today, and we're going to touch on all these industries. So, and again, please input questions into the Q&A field if you have any. All right, off we go. Economic outlook and uncertainty. Amy and Sarah, let's start with the two of you, and let's just start with the big reason, right? Why is working capital a hot topic right now? I mean, I'm leading you into the slide, but please take over.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on still in the market. So a couple of big things that we're seeing is, first of all, there's still some whiplash hangover from COVID and all of the inventory changes that were needed in the market. So a lot of organizations built inventory up because people who did have things on hand, kind of ready to go, those were winners during COVID. But now we're seeing kind of shift in consumer behavior, different preferences for what they want to do, shift into services. And not everybody has really been able to adapt quickly and be truly agile around that. We are seeing a market slowdown. So we know that as of April this year, the last time we had a good, consumer credit card spending metric, that it did decrease year over year by about 3%. So that's a pretty significant impact. There's some indications that it's getting better. We're seeing month over month improve, but sort of holding flat overall. And that obviously, impacts all of the different industries that you guys represent here today. And then if you look at consumer sentiment, we are seeing some negative trends. People are just holding on a little bit more conservatively on making any big purchases, having any big splurges in the market, and just not quite sure really what to do. So we're really seeing that shift in how money is being spent overall. Finally, we've got some inflation results, really impacting the market as well. So we know that consumer willingness to buy is only going to keep up as fast as their own wages are able to keep up.
Well, and Amy, what are you hearing from the client end? Yeah, like how are you here? Like, are you hearing the same thing for your clients day to day as you're diving in? I know specifically for you, for manufacturing distribution, where are you hearing in that segment, given that our audience is a large percentage on the call?
Yeah, it's a lot of tough, reaction to how do we plan for demand appropriately? What are we going to see in the market? How are consumers going to react to that? And frankly, not just manufacturing, John. I mean, in the service industry as well, we are seeing that shift to travel expenditures and restaurants and kind of that service industry area. And they're trying to figure out, headcount. How do we, staff to meet the additional need that's coming in here? So we're definitely seeing some of that. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add in some pieces there too.
Well, and I think to the point in spend on services, there is higher inflation in services, and that's an area that's less responsive to interest rate hikes. So it does give cause to think there may be more interest rate increases in H2 to address that inflation as we see spending shift.
And we're definitely starting to hear from some clients that, hey, access to credit and interest rates on their debt lines are starting to change and put more pressure on them to be more cash flow positive. So we're seeing just that overall how they operate their business or their organization really having to change and just shift with that interest rate increases and overall inflation. So that's a big thing that we see in there. In fact, we're even seeing that some valuations have increased because of inflation, but it's not
really?
translating.
You're seeing it go up because they're accounting for it? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, just because they have got that higher price point, right? So it's kind of the way that it impacts all the way down the line, but it doesn't mean that they have extra cash, and it can actually lead to having to pay some higher tax dividends. So lots of just uncertainty as to how that's actually going to hit the market. We're seeing a lot of interest in how to manage cash flow timing. So how can they reduce that reliance on different debts, line of credit, manage those different interest rates that they have in their business? So Sarah, did you want to add anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, anything you want to add? Oh, we have a poll. Let's go back a second. I want to make sure, Sarah, anything else you want to add on to that? Because I know inflation pressures are hitting everybody. So what are you seeing at your end that the audience could maybe tee up on?
Yeah, no, I think to Amy's point, in these conditions, I mean, the typical cycle is inflation. You see the Fed respond, they're managing to their 2% target, and that interest rate slows things down. So it's an increased cost of capital. It's an encouragement to save. And so you see consumption reduce, which is the Fed's intent. And that generally results in some GDP contraction. So that's where the uncertainty leads in H2. And is it your customers paying slower? What's the response from your suppliers and their ability to meet demand? So I think, all of this kind of uncertainty about H2 and these trends, inflation, interest rate hikes, increase on those lines of credit, if you need to pull from them for your operating funds, encourages the focus on working capital and revisiting what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know if anybody is not feeling that, right? So, okay, well, let's jump into the polling question, and then we'll start going into what the forward actions could be. Polling question 2, given current economic conditions, do you expect customer payments to slow down and cause working capital challenges? Quick yes or no, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super curious about this one, especially from the B2B payment side,
Yeah,
direct to
'cause it
consumer. There's
varies.
so many options out there right now.
Yep. Let's see what is the result. So yes, 65% yes, and a large chunk of no's too. Interesting. Okay. So we'll tackle both sides of that. All right. So let's jump into the next one here. I think, Alexa, we can go to the next slide. Cash conversion cycle. So let's start with a question here for both Sarah and Amy. How should working capital practices adjust? You know, we're seeing here 65% said, yes, we expect there to be a bit of a slowdown here. What new strategies should be considered given the current ambiguous economic outlook? Sarah, you want to start that with us?
Sure. You know, I think it is analyzing how it impacts your industry, your customer base, your source of cash inflows, your supplier base, any seasonality dependencies that you have. Q4 is a big revenue season for a lot of companies. So what is that outlook, and can you analyze how it's going to impact you and when? And part of it is your own sentiment about the economic outlook. I think there's certainty that the Fed will raise rates again. I think the degree is where it's ambiguous and how that will impact. There's a few factors that are slowing, kind of usually the typical GDP contractions that we see when the Fed increases rates. You know, there's still COVID stimulus circulating in the economy. We're heading into an election cycle. We have a greater weighting towards services, which is less impacted by interest rates. So all those factors could impact the degree to which we see interest rates increase. And I think, you know, how you feel about that in your own company, and then how it impacts you, kind of should determine, do you need to look at some quick wins? And I think the easy ones, you know, are looking at AP. How do you prioritize your vendors and when you pay them? What is that pay cadence? Is it strategic? Is there intention behind that? That's something operational that can be quickly implemented if you see your inflows getting tightened.
Sarah, is this like a one size fits all thing, or should we be looking at it different?
I really think any industry should be looking at DPO, and they should be looking at their vendor base. Who are the critical vendors? Who need to be paid more timely? And I'm not saying you're not going to pay your vendors timely, but some can be on a more critical schedule. You should be operating with a V card, a virtual card, where you're getting float, but it's operating like a vendor payment, and looking at the cycle timing of when you pay that. So I think looking at your vendor payment cycle, and when you have other big cash outflows like payroll or any debt payments, you know, any time that you can reduce the dependency on pulling from a line of credit or debt just to fund daily operational payments, where you're just organically funding it, a lot of that can be in the payable space.
And Sarah, I know as we were preparing this, like I loved how you kind of blocked, hey, days of sales outstanding and days of inventory is really about, you know, how you can use it kind of to your advantage, right? And then how do you leverage days payable as, you know, deferring on being able to have to pull from that line of credit to be able to pay your suppliers. So I think that was really helpful just to kind of put that in context of how it all relates to your ability to operate as efficiently as possible without having to pull more debt.
Makes sense. It makes sense that we're going to have to look at all these levers now, right? Like never waste a good crisis. There's a lot of things we can do right now to help. It just means we get to be more active, right? Well, okay, let's keep talking about that. So what working capital best practices do we advise companies to adopt and ingrain in their operations, maybe even their culture right now? I don't know, Amy, if you want to start with that, kind of continue to go off this.
One of the things I think is just helpful to kind of walk through is the timing of all of this. So how does working capital really kind of show up in days of inventory, days of receivables, days payable, and the cash conversion cycle overall? So what you see on that days of inventory, you want to have your inventory as tight as possible. I totally understand that, you know, during COVID, having inventory on hand was a key differentiator for being able to supply the market. But I think really looking at that and reducing it is going to help core working capital.
So Amy, I think you're right. There's a bit of a whipsaw there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You advocate they start looking at more drop shipping. Like what kind of tools and tricks are you seeing that clients are looking into now? Because I agree, we all got caught in that supply chain whipsaw effect, right? So then how do we change that now, given that maybe that's not the problem anymore?
Yeah, there's a couple of things you can do, John. I think we've got a couple of bullets in the deck too, but where we want to see that is really tightening up supply and demand planning. So there's a lot of tools in the marketplace that can give you better visibility into what might be coming down. And then having that routine and process in place to make sure that your sales team are giving you the best estimates kind of possible, and that's translating into how you purchase. And then just really strong routine about what is the min-max. How do you need to set that up appropriately? Updating your lead times for inbound, materials. Those are all going to be things that you can do on that inventory piece to keep it as tight as possible. And then on the receivable side too, so obviously you want to get paid as quickly as possible. There's definitely a lot of different ideas that we've got to kind of dig in and help with that. And on the days payable, you still hear about companies asking for really, really long payment terms. That is sometimes possible depending on how you manage your own core working capital. And that kind of leads to that overall cash conversion cycle where you really want to be able to fund your business on an ongoing basis.
To Amy's point, that's why we like this metric in regards to, not only the health and an indicator of cash flow, but really like the efficiency of your operations.
Yeah.
What drives like a competitive days inventory on hand? It's accuracy in your sales forecast, your production forecast, connectivity between purchasing and those forecasts on the receivable side. Just basics like inventory accuracy. How often are you credit and rebilling? And that's slowing down the inflow of cash. Do you have a strategic collections policy? And have you looked at how easy is it for your customers to pay you? You want to make it as easy as possible. And on the payable side, as Amy mentioned, it can be a tricky piece to navigate, but I think there's just some basics. So when you get to cash conversion cycle days, if you're dropping that, it's really showing also some efficiencies that you've adopted in your operations in addition to tactics to improve cash flow.
Well, it makes sense. I think we're seeing this all over the place. Maybe we transition now. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about, because I think you're right. You can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so you're talking about, hey, let's get those first things you can do is get metrics in place that we can see what's happening.
That's right.
So why don't you guys walk us through these? What are the metrics you see being most meaningful? People try to optimize cash flow.
There's a lot of metrics on this slide, and the purpose here is not to specifically pick out, you need to measure all of these. These are just a couple of examples of what, we do see companies measuring. Obviously, the larger you are, the more that you might be measuring. But, DPO is a very high level measurement. How do you actually impact DPO? Some of these other things are going to tell you about what levers you can pull and things that you can actually do to get better at that. When you look at process efficiency, if you've got invoices sitting in your desk that never get keyed into the system, you have zero visibility on the fact that that needs to get paid unless it's in your head. So just getting really strong on making sure when that invoice comes in, it gets entered in timely, when it's due to be paid, and then you can make really good decisions on that payable side. And then, of course, you've got volume. A lot of times payable metrics will give you some insight into how many suppliers you have. Do you really need 2 or 3 suppliers, office supplies, or could you consolidate down to 1? So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those strategies, but that's where this slide is intended to just give some ideas about what else you could do a little bit deeper into the weeds that actually helps you dig in and say, here's the actions I'm going to take to make my core working capital better. And Sarah, I know you had a couple of examples on the next slide around receivables too.
Yeah, so in the same line, obviously there's days sales outstanding, but there's a lot of other areas you should consider. I always think a company should be aware of its weighted average cost of capital. And considering that, and especially now when we're seeing interest rates rise, you should be recalculating that and being aware. Your sales team should be aware and considering that when you offer, potentially discounts to your clients for early payments. If you have customers that are larger and probably have a lower cost of capital, can you offer them a discount to help fund that cash conversion cycle? So you're getting your cash in sooner, but it's really cheaper than drawing on your line of credit to fund operational cash needs. And then the process efficiency piece, I mean, to Amy's point, from a DPO and AP perspective, if you don't have all your invoices in, you can't be as assured an aggressive disbursement schedule. And it's similar on the invoicing side. There's so many factors. Again, the ultimate goal is making it easy as possible for your customers to pay you. So that's getting them the invoice, issuing the invoice and having it delivered immediately when that service or obligation is, and then having it accurate so they're paying it right away. So I think analyzing some of these metrics, similar on the payable side, just helps you recognize opportunities. And I think, John, you had mentioned earlier the cultural piece, which we didn't dig into too much, but we had a client that we worked with that really had working capital ingrained in their culture. Their actual cash conversion days was part of their employee incentive program. And
Was it really?
Yes.
That's cool.
So
Okay.
if we didn't hit revenue, EBITDA, cash conversion cycle days, that was how the company was eligible for incentive. And we talk about some of these metrics, and it touches on, again, like connectivity between coding, sales, your invoicing functions, even your collections functions to some extent, and similar with purchasing to AP, production to purchasing. So if you've built it in and educated your employee base on the importance of this and how it can directly impact, the company's cash flow, I think it unifies, it breaks down silos, and you're getting to that level of operational efficiency that results in better cash flow.
I mean, that's a really good point, Sam. I love to hear that they're making it more of a cultural thing. Like we are all in this together, because truly we are, right? There's no one's really shielded from this too much, right? We're all going to get hit by it. So we have to do it together. And I love that you guys call that process efficiency, because I kind of feel like this is that moment now where you can take to say, hey, let's shore these up. Let's lean ourselves out. That's a way that you can not only set up new metrics, but make those processes more seamless to get the metrics correct. It's going to make you manage things a lot easier going forward, right?
Yeah, we've seen companies move from, paying or commissioning their sales force based on cash receipt versus revenue now. So there's a vested interest in making sure we're getting the cash in the door. The terms are right, the delivery method is right, paying ACH, just very, very basics, but how you incentivize people and educate people on how they're contributing to the company, I think, is a really important piece.
That's great. No, thank you for that. Okay, so let's go to another polling question, and then we'll come back to this. So so the question here, are working capital metrics part of your management reporting packages? And while you're answering that, let's talk, what are other benefits of adopting and institutionalizing working capital best practices?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it gets into just consistency in that process, right? So when you get really good at that, you actually have less administrative work because you've probably looked for ways to automate that or just make it flow a lot more seamless. And then you're not trying to play catch up after the fact. Obviously, forecast accuracy, which we'll talk about forecasting, but that's huge for Treasury to be able to use that forecast and figure out, how much cash can be invested in either long or short-term growth opportunities. Lots of different opportunities there. And you can actually get, better at your revenue cycle. So if you aren't collecting on time or in a really methodical way, you might have salespeople out on the floor, and we've seen this happen with some of our clients, where they're continuing to sell into business-to-business accounts, and they haven't paid, for the last purchase. So not
That's
having
a big
that
red flag, right, Amy? I agree. If you're
Yeah.
not watching what you're doing, you're going to get yourself even further exposed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
So
looking at
there's
the
definitely a lot
question
of
results
core
here,
business.
like half the group here, almost half the group doesn't even have these metrics set up, which I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be surprised by that, but I am. But maybe it's a really timely thing we're talking about it, because we can get those things set up. So why don't we go to the next slide here? Because I know you guys are going to walk us through kind of bring it all back around here. There's strategies for improving working capital. I know there's a lot of things we can do here, but yeah, walk us through the big 4 categories here and what you recommend as a starting point for everyone.
Yeah, I can start with receivables, Amy. I think we talked about the economic outlook, and so we wanted to highlight things that we felt that companies and leaders could action today, and it would have an impact. If you feel like you will be heavily impacted, these are things you can do. So on the receivables side, identifying those factors that are driving slow payment from your customers. and looking at your credit and rebill instances, your invoice accuracy, how are you delivering? Have you done an ACH as basic as trying to convert your customers from check payment to ACH? Speeds up your receipt of cash.
I just got an email from AT&T about this yesterday, Sarah. I'm not even joking. So like, I think that message is getting around. I'm with you.
Yeah. Those are just very simple things that you can work with your AR team tomorrow. Looking at your collections policy, is your collections team, is your collections function focusing on the right customer base and the right aging population? Taking a look, it most likely isn't an even risk level across the customer base with aging balances. And then again, with rising interest rates, recalculating your WAC and revisiting the fact of, is this time to offer some early payment discounts? And where I've seen this best implemented is in inflationary times where we know the interest rate hike is coming. And David will talk about some pricing strategies, but I've seen companies successfully implement early pay discounts in conjunction with the price increase. So the discount is almost essentially getting you back to market.
Yeah, those are great ideas, and super excited to tag David in towards the end of this piece as well. But on the inventory side, so I think I kind of mentioned that really shoring up that sales forecast. And a lot of that is just really good discipline. And then also taking a look after the fact, hey, did our sales forecasts kind of come to fruition, and making adjustments to that as you go. So it's just the need to be really agile to get some level of visibility. You don't have to have perfect visibility, but something is certainly always going to be better than nothing, and be able to adjust quickly. And then I also see organizations like holding on to inventory, thinking like, well, maybe I'll sell it next season, or maybe we can use this for something else. I think you can really get aggressive if you need to on how to liquidate that, how to move it to obsolescence, and maybe leverage that for some tax planning as well. So that I think is always in play. And then just having a really good, core inventory routines, even for like nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits do have some core inventory to be able to serve their different populations. So that all matters as well, and just how you manage that on a routine basis.
Yeah, and one thing to add, and I think those are all great points, Amy, is we always think about raw materials and finished goods, but you see a lot of manufacturing firms carrying a lot of spare parts and like maintenance inventory. And I feel like your maintenance folks they are measured on uptime. And so they have the propensity to say, well, we need 5 of these motors on the shelf, and just connectivity with them to make sure that those levels there, which are always usually slow moving inventory, are at the right levels.
Yep, and working out those SLAs with your sub vendors, right? Because then you work with them to figure out how quickly can we move those in when we need them? Can we get to a more lean state by doing that? I completely agree with you. I think something I'll add in here, I mean, no, you guys are the experts here. Something I'm noticing too, you see COGS control, and my mind goes to a little bit of that is all the tech that's supporting this. I think this also seems to be a moment for automation and really optimizing technology, what we're seeing, right? Like everybody's like, hey, how do I rationalize all the tech I have, get it down to a base minimum set of applications, and then automate this, because that's going to change our working capital position as well, right?
100%. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's my tip. That's the only thing I can add on here, but you guys got this covered.
I think you get into some tech pieces on the payables too. Just how you kind of leverage, quick bid optimization. So if you're issuing an RFP, how do you get that efficiently out there? How do you make sure that you're getting that best pricing? And that's around kind of that first point, is just categorizing and prioritizing who you work with. Are they going to be willing to work with you on terms? Or are they going to be passing along kind of price and terms increase as well? So there's a lot of opportunity there. And then Sarah, I know you've got some great experience of how to leverage things like virtual card programs.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen clients implement virtual card programs. It's similar to a P card, just more controlled, but you're getting that float. So I think it's, from an internal control perspective, there's stronger controls, but you take advantage of your credit by getting the float. You time your payments at the beginning of the cycle. So you're not just really getting the 25 days, you could optimally getting 45 days on those payment terms. And from a technology perspective, a lot of companies accept it. It's easier on the cash application side when you have a virtual payment coming through. And that ties into optimizing your disbursement schedule. That's really looking at the timing of your payments. Are they all happening at the same time? And that's constraining what you have from free cash flow and forcing you to draw on lines of credit. Taking a second glance at that's something operational that you could easily do with your payables
Well, it feels
team.
like a low-hanging fruit thing, right? Like, why wouldn't you do this? Like, I'm not hearing a downside to doing it
Yeah.
anyway, right? Yeah.
So many clients, I feel like they pay weekly and it's just their entire vendor base. So it's not strategic in a way, but it's just kind of very traditional payables process.
Yep.
Yep.
No, that's a great insight, and hopefully one that I think many of our attendees on this call could actually take advantage of today. So everybody listening, we'll get you right to Sarah if you have questions on this one. Awesome. Okay. Well, listen, guys, I appreciate us starting off the webinar this way and kind of laying the groundwork for the conversation to continue here with David and Nick. I know we have a break right now. Real quick commercial we're going to run as we transition.
Well, before we do that, I did want to comment on the core strategy type items that we listed there. I think the way to think about these is really kind of like putting gasoline on the fire, right? If you get your house in order on those other three things, the core strategy topics of kind of just good P&L management are the thing that really sends it up to the next level. It's one of those that you do that. These are things to be proactive on. They usually carry very, very little cost other than kind of elbow grease, so to speak, of time and effort and going and pulling your data to get what you need. It's the stuff that is often in the I'll do it at the end of the day when I have time bucket, and we just don't get to it. But stuff like looking at where you've gotten hit with cost increases through the inflationary times and saying, what does my new pricing need to be? Where do I have a value that allows me to take more pricing as opposed to taking just a straight cost plus approach to it to be done with it? Those are things that you should think of. The other thing is that when you think of pricing, right, that's the last person to the trough usually doesn't get to eat very much. There is a benefit to having processes that get you out in front of it with a good story, being able to communicate why you're there for pricing. And you're one of the people that you're going to have the next 20 people showing up at your door after I'm here. You don't want to be the 20th person, right? And then on stuff like zero-based budgeting for OpEx control, and then growth management, which is really being focused about who and on what products you grow with. Those are things that if you try to do them at the last minute in one big shot, it's kind of a shock to the system and it usually doesn't go well. So those are ones that the more proactive you can be, the better. But these are just good full P&L processes that we can do to really accelerate the working capital things that we have been talking about. So
it really sounds like good overall general housekeeping, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a moment
it
where
really
we actually-
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like now we have a moment to look at it because the crisis is hitting us. But normally in high growth times, you kind of forget these things, right? It's like this is spring cleaning in a way, right? We got to look at this, good housekeeping. Let's get some new metrics in place. Let's drive through some new initiatives that actually clean up what's just been sitting there for a while anyway. Is
Very
that a
much
fair
so.
way to summarize it, guys?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I want to quickly thank Amy and Sarah for your time today as we move into this commercial, and David and Nick are going to come on right afterwards. But thank you guys. This is great. Great foundation. I think hopefully everybody's gaining some knowledge on this. Let's keep going with it. And we'll take a short 30-second break.
Thanks, everyone.
The business world moves fast, and keeping up is not enough. Success demands going further, faster. Armanino equips you to embrace change with confidence and agility, propelling you forward with 360-degree business insights and technology to crush the status quo, leaving your competition in the dust. You won't just get there first, you'll chart a whole new course. Armanino, possible redefined.
I mean, we look good in that one. That's good. I mean, we were not in it. Yeah. So real quick, jumping back into things. There we go. Forecasting cash flow. So that's what we're going to jump into. And guys, we mentioned the importance of pricing earlier. David and Nick are here with us now to talk more about it. Amy and Sarah didn't go anywhere. So if you have questions for them, we'll bring them back on. No problem. Just put it in the Q&A format here. But we're going to jump into, this is a very fuzzy topic for many companies. So give us more details on how and where these companies can begin. So David, Nick, I'll throw it to you. David, maybe start us off here. Give us, keep going with what you started with, but jump right now into pricing for us, please. Or cash flow.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, no, it's good. Go ahead, Nick.
So on the topic of forecasting cash flow, a lot of companies, they have a three-statement forecast, and they're kind of centered around the statement of cash flows. Well, when we're talking about forecasting cash flow here, we're really talking about doing it on a weekly basis and in real time. So the weekly cash flow model should really revolve around, and kind of your organization should center around them, and look at the cash flow model as a compass that ultimately answers a lot of the key questions that would be on the top of mind of anyone that's operating a business. I mean, starting from the top, just simply answering the question around what today's cash balance is very valuable at the beginning of the week, to then understand, in meeting with AP, who's due to be paid today, tomorrow, and next week, and kind of what we were speaking about earlier, actually actively managing your AP vendor spend based on the reality of what today's cash balance is. On the receipt side, you can start to take a look at, what customers are paying us on time. What kind of DSOs are we kind of seeing in our weekly AR aging review that flows into the cash flow model versus maybe what we had expected a month ago or even 2 weeks ago. It starts to give you a real-time feel around the dynamics of your business. Because it's updated in real time and things are always changing. It really allows you to take a step back and recenter yourself at the beginning of every week and just think about, where are we today? What action should we be taking today, tomorrow, next week, and over the course of the next 13 weeks to really action these type of working capital initiatives. If you're thinking about, how it relates back to these types of topics around inventory purchases and CapEx, as cash is continually moving, you need to constantly be reevaluating yourself in real time and thinking about our inventory purchases. Should we continue to go down that path? Should we continue to spend on inventory in the same fashion that we did last week or last month, given that we know exactly where today's cash balance is and we have clarity around what we're going to actually receive this week and spend this week and over the subsequent weeks? Aside from
Nick,
Yep.
as you go through this, though, what are you hearing from clients? I mean, I know you're telling them about this every day. I know you're helping them with this. You have a really cool tool to help them with as well, which if you want to mention, I think you should. But what are you hearing in response when you go through this? Is it brand new to them? Are they asking for help on this? Where are they struggling the most to kind of answer these core questions you're throwing out?
Yeah, I think companies really struggle around, they will have a 3-statement forecast that's on a monthly basis. And then when they're talking about today's cash forecast, a lot of times it's just a list of bank accounts that kind of total up to what cash we're holding today. And then maybe just a conversation around near-term payments and things along those lines. You need a really clean view that ultimately forecasts, not just shows you today's cash balance, but gives you that daily and weekly granular detail around exactly what's going on this week. And I think that's where companies, it's so daunting to put one of these together. A company that might not have great data health, where it's just simply not achievable unless you kind of run through, certain automation tests and things along those lines. But if you don't have real-time visibility into your cash and clarity around not just where your cash is going, but where your entire organization is going to be doing this week, next week, the following week, you're really selling yourself short and almost operating off of data that's too far in the past to actually drive that real-time action every single week.
I think that's sound advice, Nick. It makes sense to me. Why wouldn't we want to be better and more transparent about finding these answers here, right? How do we enact them through the organization too? Right,
exactly. It's all about driving action and resetting yourself each week. We all have quarterly forecasts. Another great value add of the cash flow forecast is because it's in real time and reforecasted each week. You may have a quarterly forecast that you've submitted internally or to your board. And at some point in that forecast, there's a cash number on the balance sheet. And so if we get a month into the quarter, you can start to already kind of sense check yourself on how you feel about the next 2 months and how do you feel about your quarterly reforecast, given the changes that have happened last week, given the news that we received today. It constantly gives you this real-time compass and feel around, now that we understand where we are versus where we thought maybe a month ago, what actions can we take to kind of improve that picture or extrapolate more value out of different areas within the organization? And a lot of times that does come back to working capital. If things are going, maybe less favorably than we originally thought, perhaps we would go out to AP and advise them to change their vendor payments so that we can hit our cash targets at the correct time. If things are going really, really well, maybe we choose to continue with our CapEx initiatives and continue to invest in other different areas. And if you're doing these kind of thinking exercises on a monthly basis, you're kind of operating in the rear view. And because things change so much, you really do need to have a real-time weekly view into exactly kind of where you are today and then what the near-term future looks like in great detail.
So Nick, on that point, let's talk two things real quick, because one, there's a question from the audience, which I think is good to mention right now. But the first is, how hard is it to do all this? Like the audience members sitting here being, my God, it'll take me months, 6 months or more to get something set up to have this kind of granularity. Is it really that tough to do? Walker, how can you get this going? How quickly can you do that?
No, frankly, it's not tough. You just need to have kind of a set vision on how to accomplish one of these 13-week cash flow models. I mean, you have to keep in mind it's got to be updated every week, but the key is to not get lost in the weeds and simplify into the most digestible high-level categories that you can to look at your business on one page. You want to view your business over 25 or 30 line items every week. You don't want to be going through an entire P&L or an entire statement of cash flows and thinking about accounting. The 13-week is really a separation from accounting, and it's really something that should be compared against accounting. So, the ways to kind of do it, I mean, in a simple sense, if you just had one bank account at a company, you would want to pull all the transactions and then group them into the categories that make most sense to you. So you would just want to pull in, and for revenue, you would just want to pull in trade receipts. What are my typical receipts that I'm receiving? And then what are some one-time payments that don't fall in the normal course of business that I would typically expect? Right. Then on the outflow side, you want to just group into more high-level categories, things like AP, payroll, other things that are core to your business, so that you have one snapshot that you review every Monday or Tuesday that reflects where you are today and exactly what's going to happen this week and the next.
That makes sense. Now, we have a question from our audience I think is pertinent to this part of the conversation. I think it's for both Nick and David. I think you both have a perspective here, but questions, are you primarily doing weekly forecasting in spreadsheets, or are there any software that you have used that you found helpful? Now, I'm leading you to water here, guys. I already know the answer, but please, both of you, we'll start with Nick. Please share your view on that.
Yeah, for me, it's in spreadsheets. I'll say it's not just keying things in Excel. We tack on a lot of additional technology. I mean, there's a lot of actually free applications within Excel that can really take this to the next level in terms of cleaning and automating things and getting things moving in a timely fashion. We're not in the place where we're copying and pasting in Excel, but for me, most of my models, and even ones that consolidate over multi-entities and along those lines, they are all in Excel, and we're able to achieve this kind of looping the technology that we have that's already existed in Excel to kind of get us there. But David, I'll let you go if you've got any experience with software.
Yeah, there are some. There's this
just
kind
a
of
little bit of experience with software, huh, David?
It fits a little bit more into a broader FP&A one. And I think, John, the next one, it's kind of a good transition for talking about how to get your house in order for it. There certainly are some softwares that you can use, offshoots of something like a Workday Adaptive. That's a common
let's go to the next
FP&A
slide
software.
as David explains this, because I think
those things can be excellent tools, of which forecasting can be a piece of it. Whoops, looks like we had a polling question.
We'll come back to the polling question in a second. Why don't you finish answering the technology question, we'll go back.
This is really the part that I think slows a lot of people up, right? Is that this is a common piece that we use to talk through all the pretty things that everybody loves to talk about wanting along the top, right? Cash flow forecasting would be one of the ones along the top. And one of the first questions that you talk about on how I get there is recognizing that you have to have some pieces of your data house in order to give you what you need. What Nick can talk you through on kind of the 13-week cash flow that he has can kind of sidestep a bunch of these issues. But when you start talking about software solutions where you can really speed this up and really automate it and really just make it part of how you do your day-to-day and super easy lift on your finance and accounting teams, this is some of the work to be done, is to talk through what data do I need to run my business? How do I slice that data out? My accounts, my customers, what we would call the data dimensions. And then talk about how it all comes together. So it's really putting good structure to what's there, so that you can put good software solutions on top of it, a solver, an adaptive plan.
Where it's like garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yes,
if they don't have
it very much is
set up, it doesn't matter what tool you're going to use; it's not going to work for you.
Yeah, and this is one where really, this is honestly where we get brought in the most to come talk to people, because a lot of times is it a lot easier for a third-party person to see your business for what it is, and these are two different data sets that you need to have split out in order to give you and unlock that reporting you want, whereas you might have them in one place in what you've got now. So there's work to be done there, but I think Nick's next page, where he starts talking about the frequency of it.
We got to go back to the polling question for those who
That's great.
need the credit for this. So, polling question 4: what are your organization's biggest challenges when preparing a cash flow forecast? Alexa, take it away. We have an untitled question. I think we can probably ignore that one. I don't know what that may be a misprint there. So while they're doing that, David and I've seen you do this with clients where it's really about setting up the foundation. And at first they don't think like that, right? Because you're really thinking the output, and we all get it. You want that output of the right dashboard, the right report, the right information. But just to kind of pile on to your point, I've witnessed it as well. If that underneath that tree, that foundation isn't set, man, it doesn't really matter at all what you look to do. You're going to be struggling and wasting a lot of man hours trying to get there.
Yeah, it's a combination of that. Data structure is a thing that I think is being moved to the forefront in general because of how much people are seeing real life examples where AI, machine learning, other things can really drive their business forward. And they run smack into a wall where they're told, hey, until you get your data in a usable fashion that those types of programs can take advantage of it, you're stuck and you risk falling behind. So that's where it really is becoming a critical issue for people.
Well, if you look at the polling results, you're talking about 44% of this audience is having data issues of some sort here, right? So I think you're keying in on the right things. Yeah.
And I would argue that this is probably a finance and accounting heavy place. And so they're usually the ones that are stuck picking up the pieces.
Right. Well, we can help with that if that's the case, right? So, all right. So let's go to that next slide, or 2 slides down, Alexa, because I know we went back. Sorry. All right, so let's go to data frequency and digestibility. And Nick, I know this is something you're quite passionate about and have spent a lot of time on. Why don't you walk everyone through this and kind of the approach?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's the correct wording, but happy to hear the responses around challenges around cash flow forecasting do come back to data. That's spot on. That's what I've seen in my experience building these over and over again. And kind of what David was talking about around software solutions and getting all this stood up and making it best in class. That's all great, and that's definitely something critical to an organization. But the reality is, cash is live, it's real, and it's happening right now. And software implementations could take some time. And so until we can get software stood up, there is no excuse, no matter what, we will be able to put together a real-time 13-week cash flow using these tools that I kind of alluded to earlier in the call. The 2 kind of core themes around this are, it has to be real time, meaning the data has to be frequent. We have to access it every single Monday to understand exactly what happened last week. The issue with that is if you're typically dealing with accounting data, it's very clean, it's nice. We know exactly where all of the chart of accounts are. The accounts are actually tagging vendors to the line items and things along those lines. If you're looking for data feeds that are available in real time that tell you what happened last week, unless you've got an accounting team that is reconciling that every week, you're in a state where you've got the data, you can understand, I can go into my bank account and I can look at the cash balance and it shows me exactly what happened, but you're going to end up with a gigantic spreadsheet that at the end of the day, you can't do much with quickly. And you've also got to remember that you've got to do this every single week and it has to be accurate. So,
really good point.
Yeah, so what we need to do is, starting out, when we're building these, is just simply think about the data feeds. Don't worry about the usability of them. And just for simplicity, let's just think about cash. If I'm going in to build a 13-week cash flow model, the first thing I'm going to understand is simply what are all of the cash accounts that the company has, and then what lines of credit the company has. For each one of those accounts, there's no reason why we can't go straight into a company's online bank account and pull all of their CSVs. The issue is we need to be able to organize this all in real time. And so kind of the key, top, use of Excel that I use that's less familiar is this tool called Power Query, where we can pull all of your Excel transaction information into a folder, and we can pull other data sources too, like your AR, AP, get on a cadence where every Monday or Tuesday, we're receiving all the data sources that we need to know that we need to inform the model, save them into a folder so that in Excel every week, the process is simply saving the data down and then clicking refresh in Excel, and Power Query will reorganize all of that data and make it really, really clean. So simply you can run sum ifs on the face of your cash flow model, and it'll all automatically flow and update each week. And you'll be able to confirm that it reflects the exact cash number that you would see if you were to look into your bank account, early this morning. The other kind of challenge around just simply gathering the data and reorganizing it into nice columns and all, that's all great and fine. But as I said earlier, a lot of the times, if you're thinking about banking transactions, there's no vendor key, there's no clean, unique identifier on all those line items. You don't really have a good sense of what was AP, what was payroll that you can look at quickly. You can look at it with a human eye, but it's not really something you can automate. So oftentimes we'll leverage actually manually tagging each individual transaction into those digestible categories.
So
recently,
there's a question coming in here. Maybe David, you can step in and answer this since I know this may be, and Nick as well, please too. But we got a question from an attendee here. QuickBooks Online, which obviously a lot of our clients and a lot of people use, has cash flow planning tools built in. Now, do you recommend they use those? Or are there better things or other things they should be looking at outside and do this forecasting outside your traditional ERP or general ledger system? What would you guys recommend? David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would just say that this one, I think is going to go, I'm going to direct it back to that data question I had, right? The question is, do you have everything you need to answer the real life questions of what's happening in your business flowing through your QuickBooks Online tool? If you do, then yeah, you probably can get there using that, right? If there are things that what's flowing through QuickBooks doesn't give you the full picture of what's actually happening, then you're not going to be able to get there with that because you're going to need other data that helps explain it, right? It's a simple, if you were to say what percent of the answer is explained by the amount of stuff in QuickBooks Online, if that answer is 99%, yeah, you're there. If it's 50%, then you're going to have to do something outside of it.
Again, it's all
so
about
that's
the data
how I'd
input,
answer that
right?
one.
It's all about the data input, right? That makes sense because if it's not there, you're not going to be able to use those add-ons or tools. Right.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the most common things is that we hear that, we have this data and that data, but then, oh, that data exists on some sales guy's PC. And that's where it is. Well, that's great, but that doesn't help us for the matter at hand that we're talking to today.
It's not good. That's not where you want it, but yeah.
That's not ideal. So
yeah, fair enough. Thank you, David. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here, Nick. Talk about that rolling 13-week model. Now, I've been impressed with the tool you've developed here. I know it's AI based, it runs fast. But why don't you walk everybody through the basics of this and then take it from there?
Yeah. And so kind of off the QuickBooks and point around the data kind of cleanliness and health. The AI tool that we have at the end of the day, we can categorize all of your transactions line by line into these digestible categories that you're seeing on the face of the 13-week model. So if you're looking at a large data set that's got a number of messy line items, we just have to tag a certain subset of that to shipping, to CapEx, to marketing, to salaries, benefits, and taxes. And the AI tool will take that pattern that we've fed the machine and it will extrapolate it over all of the rest of the transactions. So we'll usually go back a full year to just look at what's happened by week in the past to then start thinking about the future. If you're thinking about the future, we look at the 13 weeks as a really core framework to view your cash every single week. And to answer the question, where we are today and where are we headed? The reason for that is 13 weeks always covers the next quarter. And so you're always able to kind of validate the cash number in the 13-week model versus the balance sheet. If you go further than 13 weeks, you're getting a little bit too far in the future to be certain. And kind of the energy should really be spent more in the near term. If you choose to go less than 13 weeks, you may miss a big payment that might have to be coming out, such as like a principal interest payment or something along those lines. So looking at your company every single week in this exact view is exactly the compass kind of work that I was speaking about earlier. And so this is a great example of exactly what a 13-week looks like in these digestible categories that we can group actions with using our AI tool.
What I like about this too is Nick, you're showing people that it's not some high mountain to climb here. You did this in Excel, right? It's not like we're saying you have to invest in sophisticated software just to be able to do this. Yes, you can, and if it's appropriate for you and it makes sense for the size of your organization, great. But you don't have to get the output you want.
Correct. Yes. Just identify the data, simplify, categorize, use technology, and you can get an Excel framework stood up like this frankly, in a couple of weeks' time.
Yep, that's great. All right. Well, I know we're getting a little shorter on time. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let's go to the next slide and let you guys kind of summarize this kind of cash flow accuracy forecasting approach. Nick, why don't you lead us? And David, please jump in as well.
Yeah, so there's kind of two core tenets around cash flow forecasting accuracy. The left is really all around these upstream processes that you have in place that David was kind of alluding to earlier. They do ultimately drive cash flow forecast accuracy. Ultimately, it's this concept of garbage in, garbage out. So you know, starting with the cash actuals themselves, you need to have frequent and digestible cash transaction data. But you also have to have accurate connection to your sales funnel to understand what recent wins have we seen that we actually might see that cash for over the next couple of weeks. You need to have good handle on your KPIs and historical percentages, understanding certain costs are usually a percentage of revenue. So as we forecast cash, we should forecast that in a similar fashion. And then arguably the most important, aside from the cash transactions, the most important thing towards accurate cash flow forecasting is up-to-date accounts receivable and accounts payable. It's this concept of, you know, the most accurate representation of what you're going to receive or spend this week and next week comes back to invoices. What invoices have we received? Can we look at that? And same thing on the payment side. Aside from these upstream, oh, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Nick. I said that makes a ton of sense. I think hopefully this is enlightening the audience as well.
Yeah, and so aside from the upstream processes, if you're thinking about forecast accuracy, it's really diligent grading of yourself. So every time you produce a weekly cash flow model, we consolidate all of those into a single data source so that, you know, over time, if you're reforecasting the business every single week, and you're doing this over 2-3 months, you're going to end up with a number of iterations of the cash flow model where you can go back and look at what did we think we were going to do this week versus what actually happened. But you can double click even further. How good are we forecasting 4 weeks out on these clear categories that we've outlined in the 13-week? How good were we doing it 8 weeks out? Really going back and forth and stretching yourself and testing yourself as to how good you were each week can allow you to then understand where you made mistakes and correct them in the future. So that over time, you get something that you're really confident in and you feel accurate, you feel it's totally accurate, and you're able to make real concrete decisions off of it.
Well, Nick, you know, I think that's the part I like the most is that this isn't just a report for report's sake, which I know sometimes we all get wrapped up in. I get it. This is a report for action, right? That's what I'm hearing from you. Is this is a report for action. This actually is analysis that enables management to make better, smarter decisions because they have a more accurate forecast. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Absolutely. And we all know a model is a model, right? And we'll all look at a model with a margin of error when we're actually going to make a decision. And if you're transparent and you're really diligent around that forecast accuracy tracking, the margin of error that you associate with the model becomes lower and it allows you to make more confident decisions that you can actually trust off of what you're reviewing each and every week.
That's great. So, okay, so let's go to the next slide here because I want to make sure we capture this as we wrap up and everybody can go camera on. This is to the audience. You know, we've covered a broad topic here that it can get very fuzzy and detailed, right? And we get that. So we're just teeing it up to show that kind of the different areas we think that anybody on this call today can start to look after. And obviously there's more behind all of those comments. So would you like to receive file from anybody on this panel? Please let us know because we will reach out. If not, it's okay. We just appreciate you attended today and heard from all of us. This is obviously an area that we all care quite a bit about, and we're seeing a movement amongst our client base in every industry that this is becoming mission critical, cash flow and forecasting. So I just want to thank all of our panelists today and our attendees. It was a pleasure being on this with you. You know, I know you guys are working hard on this with all the clients you service today, so thank you for taking the time out. All right, Alexa, I think that's all we got today for all the attendees. For all the attendees, thank you again for joining in. And if we have to, we will follow up and reach out. But please don't be shy about reaching out to us if you need anything. Thank you.